The sound hit like a thunderclap in the stillness of the night, a heavy thud, then a frail whimper that cut through the Cleveland rain. My head snapped around on instinct. At the end of the narrow alley, where a tired streetlight spilled across wet concrete, something small writhed. A puppy. It had tumbled from the crooked steps of an abandoned house, its tiny body slamming against the hard ground. The impact stole my breath. The creature lay there, motionless, its black and tan coat streaked with mud, its soft ears hanging limp. No bigger than my hand, maybe 3, 4 months old. So thin the ribs pressed sharply against its soaked skin. No voices. No footsteps running near. Only the hoarse sound rising from the puppy's throat, a cry, trembling and desperate. My chest tightened. I tried to walk on, whispering to myself, "Not my problem." But the cry came again, weaker this time, like a blade sliding deep into my ear. I froze, my fists tightening inside my coat pockets. It tried to lift its head, if you could call it that. The eyes were cloudy, pale, as if light had never touched them. My stomach lurched. The puppy wasn't just broken. It was blind. A shallow, fractured breath escaped its tiny chest. The whole body shook, each tremor like death knocking at the door. I was 54 years old. I had seen cruelty more than once in my life, but this sight stripped reason away. All I saw was a fragile life, cast out, tossed down the steps like garbage. That Cleveland night cut like a knife. My own breath drifted out in clouds of smoke, but its breath, faint, ragged, each rise of its chest made me fear it would be the last. People hurried past. Some glanced, then turned away. A voice barked from the corner, rough and cold. "Don't touch it!" Just a broken dog, I stood rooted, my body trembling, not from the cold, but from anger. I had a choice. I could walk away, let that sound dissolve into the rain, vanish into the night. Or I could step forward, kneel, and lift a dying heartbeat. My pulse hammered. Then I moved. Each step struck like a drumbeat, pushing me closer to fate. The puppy quivered when I knelt beside it. Mud caked its muzzle. Its tiny legs curled awkwardly, refusing to obey. It squirmed, but the body betrayed it. I reached out, then hesitated. If I touched it, would I break it further? If I lifted it, would it die in my arms? But then came a whimper, thin, so thin only I could hear. Not a sound of pain, a sound of pleading. I tore off my heavy coat and laid it on the wet ground. Sliding my hands beneath that fragile frame, I lifted as if cradling glass. It weighed almost nothing, just a bundle of bones wrapped in failing breath. A sound slipped from its throat, a rasping sob. And when I whispered, "Stay with me, little one. Please, stay with me," its head nudged faintly, as if that voice was the last thread keeping it tied to life. I wrapped the coat tight around its shivering body and stepped out of the alley. And in that moment I knew. If I let go, it would never see the dawn. I held Shadow tight in my arms, his tiny body trembling like a brittle branch about to snap. Cleveland rain drifted down in sharp, cold drops against my face, but nothing could drown out the violent shiver coming from the life curled inside my soaked coat. My footsteps pounded hard across the flooded sidewalk. My heartbeat roared louder than the engines rushing past. Cars tore by, tires hissing, splashing filthy water against my shoes. Headlights flared and vanished, leaving only the cold dark behind. No one looked. No one stopped. Questions spun in my head, each one slicing through the last thread of calm I had left. Would he make it? If I moved him, would fragile bones shatter? If I carried him to a vet, would they only shake their heads and say it was too late? I stopped beneath a street lamp, breath ragged. My hand clenched around the coat, feeling each wheezing rise of Shadow's chest. That tiny ribcage fought for every gulp of air, each breath like a battle. A whimper slipped out, thin, sharp, impossible to ignore. I leaned against the icy pole, jaw locked until it went numb. Fear surged, the fear of watching him die in my arms. The fear that everything I did would mean nothing. But then came a thought worse than all of it. If I did nothing, he would die right here. A cold, silent death at the feet of strangers too busy to care. I fumbled out my phone, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. Rain smeared the screen, my fingers slipping over the numbers. I dialed the one I always called on nights too tired to drive. Yellow cab. The ringing filled my ear, my chest tightening with each pulse. Yellow cab. What's the address? The dispatcher's voice was flat, mechanical. I need a car now. St. Clair and East 72nd. Emergency! I shouted, my voice breaking, catching in my throat. I'll send one over. I snapped the phone shut, slumped down, and bent close to Shadow's ear. Listen, little one. We're going. Just hold on a little longer. I promise. His paw curled, a faint whimper escaping. Tiny claws brushed my wrist as if he understood, as if he was clinging to that promise to stay alive. An engine's growl rose in the distance, headlights cutting gold through the rain. Tires screeched against wet pavement as the cab skidded to the curb, water spraying white into the air. The door swung open. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, froze when he saw the bundle in my arms. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd refuse, bark, "No filthy dogs in my car." But instead, he only hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. Get in. Quick, I dove into the back seat, clutching Shadow. The door slammed shut, and in that instant, the world split in two. Outside was rain, darkness, and indifference. Inside was a fragile heartbeat, slipping from me. The wipers scraped across the glass, steady and relentless. My own heart hammered without rhythm. I bent low, staring at Shadow. His cloudy eyes stared blankly, but his small head tilted toward my voice. Don't leave me, Shadow. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. My whisper shook, but the words were steel. He couldn't answer, but his breath, weak, uneven, still touched my palm. I held him tighter, as if letting go for even a second would let him vanish from this world. Outside, Cleveland roared, blind and unfeeling. But inside that small cab, a battle raged between life and death. And I knew this wasn't just about saving a puppy. This was my vow that this time I would not turn away from the fragility of life. The taxi surged forward, cutting through the gray storm, and I held Shadow, stepping with him into the fight between survival and the end. The taxi jolted as it pulled from the curb, tires slicing through rain-soaked pavement, throwing up ribbons of yellow light beneath Cleveland's street lamps. I sat pressed into the back seat, arms clamped around Shadow inside my coat, terrified that if I left even the smallest gap, he would slip away. The car filled with noise, the steady swipe of wipers, the patter of rain drumming on the roof, the low growl of the engine. But above it all was Shadow's breathing, short, ragged, hoarse. Each rise of his tiny chest made me hold mine. The driver said nothing. He only glanced into the rear view, his eyes lingering on the sight of me clutching a trembling scrap of life. And in that look, I saw it. He was holding back a feeling he didn't have words for. Shadow whimpered, faint but piercing through the wet fabric. His claws, no bigger than pinpricks, scraped weakly against my chest, desperate. I bent close, whispering, "Listen to me, little one. I'm here. Don't give up." His head tilted toward my voice, cloudy eyes searching. He couldn't see me, but he knew the sound. In that darkness, my voice was the only thread holding him back from the void. I pressed my cheek into his soaked fur. The smell of mud mixed with the faint trace of blood. Pain swelled up, choking my throat. Tears slipped free, soaking the coat, seeping into his frail body. The driver cleared his throat, his gaze locked on the black road ahead, but I saw his hands gripping the wheel, knuckles bone white. In the mirror, his eyes shimmered, the hard lines of his face trembling for just a beat. We passed familiar streets that looked strange tonight. A convenience store, glowing, neon bars flashing, groups of kids sheltering under awnings. Life kept moving. But inside the cab, the world narrowed to two sounds, a fading whimper and the pounding of my own heart. Shadow exhaled, longer than before. Panic seized me. I hugged him tighter, ear pressed to his mouth to be sure he was still there. Words poured out of me, a prayer more than a whisper. "Hold on, Shadow. I know you're tired, but I'm here. I won't let you be alone." Rain thickened, hammering the windshield. The wipers carved through the dark like the ticking of an invisible clock counting down. The driver's voice came, low and hoarse, as if he too had to swallow emotion. "How far to the hospital?" 10 minutes, I rasped. "Please, as fast as you can." He nodded, foot slamming the gas. The cab lurched, spraying water high across the sidewalk. I nearly pitched forward but held Shadow tight, as if loosening my grip would let him vanish. Time stretched into hours. I watched every breath, counted every whimper, my heartbeat stumbling with each spasm of his tiny frame. For a moment my mind slipped back. Rusty, the shepherd of my childhood, the only friend I had in those lonely years. I remembered how he pressed his muzzle into my hand on nights I cried. And now Shadow lay here, as fragile as I once was. The thought hit hard. What if I was too late? What if the doctors couldn't save him? What if death were already waiting? My arms tightened, voice breaking. "Don't leave me, Shadow. I need you more than you know." The taxi screeched to a halt outside the animal hospital, tires shrieking against wet pavement. The driver unlocked the doors, his voice catching. "Go!" God help him, I didn't stop to thank him. I bolted into the rain, Shadow clutched to my chest. The hospital doors burst open, flooding me in harsh white light. Cold, urgent. My shout cracked the air. "Help! Please, he needs help." And in that instant, the ride through the storm ended, but the battle for his life had only just begun. The hospital doors slammed shut behind me, sealing off the sound of rain. Inside was a blaze of white light, cold, clinical, stripping hope bare. I laid Shadow on the intake counter, my voice breaking, barely a breath. "Please, save him." The nurses turned. One instantly peeled back the coat wrapped around his tiny body. Fingers touched him, and a cry tore out of his throat, thin, sharp, piercing me like a needle. "Get him inside now!" a woman's voice commanded. I followed as the emergency room door burst open, the stench of antiseptic and metal rushing over me. They set Shadow on a steel table. The fluorescent lamp overhead burned down, revealing every wound, every patch of fur matted with mud and dried blood. A veterinarian entered, mid-50s, eyes ringed with exhaustion but hard as ice. Pulling on gloves, he bent over the fragile form. "Still breathing?" he asked. "Barely," a nurse replied. My hands clamped on the table edge to keep steady. Shadow's heartbeat fluttered beneath his paper-thin skin, but it was there. The vet lifted one spindly leg, pressing along the bone. Shadow screamed. The sound buckled my knees. I had to catch myself on the table to keep from collapsing. "Multiple fractures," the vet muttered. "Several breaks." His hand moved upward to the cloudy eyes. He waved a finger before them, waiting. Nothing. He leaned closer, closer still. No response. His brow furrowed. No reaction to light. Vision's gone. Likely neurological. Permanent. The words landed heavy, cold as a death sentence. My chest locked tight, my ears roared. Permanent. I looked down. Shadow's body shuddered in waves, his head tilting toward my voice as if clinging to any sound left. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the despair bleeding through the air. Chances? The word ripped out of me, raw and broken. The vet pulled off his gloves, sighing, eyes fixed on the trembling pup. We'll try to stabilize him. But honestly, the odds are very low. Multiple fractures, blood loss, extreme weakness. He may not survive the night. My fists clenched until nails carved crescents into my palms. His words cut like a blade straight through my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand that he fight for the pup, that giving up was not an option. But my lips only shook, soundless. I bent close to Shadow, my mouth at his ear, whispering, "You don't need to see the world. Just feel it. Feel that you're not abandoned anymore." A faint whimper answered. His head nudged weakly against my palm, a motion so fragile yet heavier than the world. For a flicker, hesitation shadowed the vet's face. His words were clinical, but his eyes betrayed doubt that even he believed this life could be saved. Nurses moved quickly, preparing drugs, wires, and IV lines. The door swung shut, cutting me off. Shadow's frail cries sank into the sterile room, leaving me stranded in the hallway, hands trembling against the frame. My reflection stared back from the glass. Red eyes, a face aged 10 years in minutes. A question burned, hollow and unanswerable. How could someone throw a living creature down the stairs? How could cruelty come so easily? I buried my face in my hands, sinking into the waiting chair. Rain tapped against the window, and with each passing second, I feared the small heart inside that room would fall silent, forever. The ER door closed behind the vet, leaving me alone in the long, hollow corridor. The sting of antiseptic clung to the air. Fluorescent light bled across the walls, draining the space of any warmth. I sat there, hands locked tight, heart racing as though it wanted to sink with every shrill beep echoing from behind that door. 2 hours dragged by like a lifetime. Every muffled sound inside made me flinch. I had no idea what they were doing. I only knew one thing. Shadow was fighting. And so was I, in the slow torture of waiting. When the door opened, a nurse appeared, face lined with fatigue but softened by her eyes. "You can come in. He's still here." I shot to my feet, chest ready to explode. Inside, my eyes found him instantly. Shadow lay swaddled in white bandages, his tiny body glimmering under the harsh light. 4 lines pierced his legs, a thin tube delivered oxygen across his small muzzle. The monitor pulsed, erratic, but alive. I stepped closer, lowering myself beside the table. My hands shook as they brushed his bandaged paw. He twitched, but didn't pull away. A sound slipped from his throat, frail, but alive. "Shadow," I whispered, voice breaking. "You did it. You're still here." The vet moved beside me, his voice dropping low. "We stabilized the fractures, gave transfusions, and started antibiotics. He's weak, but there's hope. The biggest problem now is that he refuses to eat. Without nutrition, his body won't hold." My gaze shifted to a small bowl of warm milk. A nurse tried with a spoon, pressing it gently to his lips, but he turned his head, mouth sealed. My eyes burned. He wasn't just in pain. He was too tired to want life. "Let me try," I said softly. I dipped a fingertip into the milk, touching it to his mouth. A single drop rolled across his lip. For a moment, he licked. I held my breath. I tried again. Another drop. He swallowed. His tiny throat trembled. Tears fell. Not because he ate, but because he chose to. A third drop. A fourth. Then the nurse returned with the spoon. Shadow turned, slowly lapping at it, one hesitant lick at a time. The beeps on the monitor steadied. The vet drew a long breath, his eyes easing. Good. Very good. He may get through tonight. I never looked away. I sat there telling him fragments of my life, about Rusty, the shepherd of my childhood, the lonely nights, the weight of losing the only friend I'd had. I didn't know how much he understood, but I saw his ears flick with every syllable, saw the trembling ease when my voice filled the silence. Time dripped slowly after that. By day, nurses shuffled in, changing bandages, giving injections. By night, the hallway fell still, leaving only me and his uneven breaths. I'd rest my head on the edge of the table, my hand resting over his paw. Sometimes he tugged at it weakly, then left it there, as if granting permission. One night, I woke to a whimper. He stirred, muzzle searching the air as though reaching for something. I whispered fast, "Shadow, I'm here." At once, he tilted toward my voice, pointed ears trembling. His body relaxed, his breathing leveled, and I realized he didn't need to see. He only needed sound. He only needed someone to hold on to. On the third day, when a nurse set down a tray of soft food, Shadow didn't turn away. He sniffed, then licked, then swallowed. For the first time, I saw his tail shift, a faint, fragile wag. I buried my face in my hands, tears spilling. That flicker of a tail carried a declaration. I haven't given up. The endless days in that white room became a gauntlet. Every breath, every sip of milk, every fresh bandage, a battle. But I had seen light break through the dark, and I knew, if Shadow was still willing to fight, I would never leave the battlefield. The days after Shadow managed his first meal, the room began to change. The heart monitor no longer screamed alarms. His breathing steadied. And for the first time since that night, I saw a flicker of peace on his face. But the road ahead was brutal. Shadow was still blind, his body still wrapped in layers of bandages. His thin legs trembled each time he tried to lift them. A single shake of his head was enough to topple him. I knew medicine alone wouldn't save him. He needed a reason. He had to relearn trust, the very thing people had stolen from him. On the fifth day, I lowered him to the floor, spreading a thin blanket to cushion the fall. At first, he froze, ears pricked, eyes clouded and lost. His body stiff as stone, tail clamped tight. I didn't rush. I sat a few feet away, jingling the keys in my pocket. The metallic clink echoed. His ears twitched. He tilted his head toward the sound. "That's it. Listen, Shadow," I whispered, low and steady. He edged one paw forward, shaking. The other stumbled, his body nearly collapsing. My hand shot out, ready to catch him, but he fought for balance. A small whimper rose. Not hopeless this time, but questioning. "Go on." "I'm here." He moved again. Each step is a battle. Twice he fell, muzzle brushing against the blanket. My chest locked, but I didn't scoop him up. If I lifted him too soon, he'd never believe in his own legs. The third time he wobbled, then stopped. His nose flared, drawn toward the sound of my breath. One step, then another, until at last his muzzle touched my hand. Tears broke loose. "Good boy, Shadow. You found me." From that day on, we trained daily, learning to see with sound and scent. My voice became his compass. I clapped, stomped, and guided him with words. The thuds against walls tore at me, but I realized each collision taught him that the world was real, and he had to read it differently. One night, I woke from the chair beside his bed to a weight pressing lightly on my arm. Shadow had crawled on his own, resting his head in the crook of my elbow. No whimper, just steady breaths, tail brushing faintly against the blanket. I lay still, tears running hot into my hairline. In that moment, I knew he had chosen me. The next morning, the vet called me into his office. His tone was professional, but caution edged his eyes. Shadow will live, but he will never see. Caring for him won't be a matter of weeks or months. It will be for life. Silence weighed heavily. The words pressed like stones. Fear surged, sleepless nights, clumsy steps, endless stumbles. Could I handle it? But then I remembered last night, how he had found his way back to me, trusting without question. He hadn't weighed his chances. He hadn't doubted. He had simply believed. I met the vet's gaze and nodded. He chose me, and I won't betray that trust. That night, back in the recovery room, I sat by him again. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching toward the sound of my shoes. I laid my hand across his chest. He pressed into it without hesitation. That thread, the fragile, unbreakable thread, had been sewn back together with pain, patience, and a trust we both needed to survive. And I knew we were no longer two survivors clinging alone. We had become a pair, bound against the darkness by a bond deeper than words. A month later, Cleveland mornings carried a different breath. Sunlight threaded through the trees, glinting off damp bricks still kissed by dew. I pushed open the wooden door to the backyard, moving slowly. Shadow trembled lightly at my side. He was no longer the curled Shadow from the ER. His frame still bore traces of frailty, but life had returned. His black and tan coat shone faintly now, strengthened by food and medicine. And in every shaky step, I saw determination. I set him down on the grass. At first, he froze, ears pricked, body stiff. He sniffed the air, the scent of earth, the sweetness of grass, the distant call of birds. Sunlight fell over his scarred coat, a silent baptism. "Go on, Shadow," I said, voice breaking but steady. He lifted a paw, hesitant, then another. Each step shook like a test of courage. When a clump of tall grass tripped him, he stumbled but stood again. My fists clenched, fighting the urge to rush over. He had to know the world wasn't only darkness, that he could face it. After a while, Shadow tilted his blind face toward the sky he could not see. A breeze caught his ears, and then his tail wagged. I dropped to my knees, tears spilling. A simple motion, yet inside it was the entire journey, from the shadows of a staircase to sunlight on the grass. Day after day, I brought him outside. He learned to read the world, the rustle of leaves, the crunch of footsteps, the rhythm of my voice. Slowly, he stopped whimpering at strange sounds. He no longer flinched at a neighbor's hand. Instead, he tilted his head, tail wagging, searching for presents. One afternoon, the neighborhood children came. They crouched low, small palms stretched out. I held my breath, afraid Shadow would shrink away, but he didn't. He stepped forward, slow, sniffed, then pressed his muzzle into a child's hand. Laughter rang out, pure, bright enough to drown every shadow of pain. A neighbor asked, "How is he still gentle after all he's been through?" I smiled, my voice tight. Maybe because he never stopped believing in love. And it was true. Shadow didn't need sight to see the world. He saw with a heart that had refused to break, even when his body had been shattered. Many nights, when he curled against my feet, breathing steady, I thought about the others. The abandoned. The unseen shadows wait in the dark for a hand to reach out. They had no words, only whimpers, only pleading eyes. But if someone listened, if someone stopped, an entire life could be saved. Shadow taught me compassion isn't a choice. It's a responsibility. The only thread that pulls us back from indifference. Today, as I watch him stumble run across the yard, blind but free, I know he has given me the greatest gift. The belief that even in darkness, light remains, if we're willing to open our hearts. And that's the lesson I want anyone hearing this story to carry. If you hear a cry in the night, don't turn away. If you see a trembling life on the edge, don't walk past. Because your choice may be the border between despair and a new beginning. Shadow lost his eyes, but he gave me vision, a way of seeing the world with an open heart. And maybe that is the brightest light any of us can find. If Shadow's story touched your heart, please don't let it end here. Out there are countless others waiting, small lives hoping for a hand, for a voice to trust. Have you ever reached out to save a dog, a cat, or any fragile life? If you have, share your story in the comments. Perhaps your words will spark hope in someone else's heart. And don't forget to subscribe and share this video. Every share, every story carried forward, is another chance for a shadow to find their light. Together, piece by piece, we can make sure no cry for help is ever lost in the dark.